So, hello and welcome, everybody. Hello and welcome. Today, the title is The People Businesses Need to Be AI Driven. So, we're going to be talking about the people that business actually need if they want to have a data driven or AI driven company and culture. My name is Chris Armbruster. I'm the Director Data Career at the AI Guild. And with me today is Nitin Kumar, who is currently an independent AI consultant based in Zurich. Hello, Nitin.
Hi, Chris. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for joining us today. So, the people businesses need. Um, Interesting. Very much in line also with what I'm interested in. So, I'm going to jump in and ask you, why are you focusing on people as, say, opposed to focusing on technology or infrastructure? What caught your attention there? What is it about the people businesses need?
So, last several years, when I have been involved with like several Swiss industries in their data and AI initiatives, what we have found out, or what I have found out, is that most organizations are doing heavy investments in technology, and still most of them are not realizing benefits from artificial intelligence. It comes down to the problems at the level of data scientists, let's say, not understanding business, managers not understanding artificial intelligence, leadership not understanding about data strategy. So primarily it comes down to people and the culture in an organization. And backing that up, actually MIT has been releasing last 4 years a couple of studies every year, analysis of the American market and what makes successful AI organizations stand out in the market versus, let's say, the laggers in the market. And what they have clearly shown is that uh, to succeed with artificial intelligence, 1x investment has to go into development, around 10x investment has to go into production, and 100x investment, which is 100-fold of the development, actually has to go into people, culture, and processes. And companies
Cool.
that have, yes. So
Okay. Yes. So that okay. Thank you for the dimensions, right? The 1 to the 10 to the 100, and the 100 is with the people. And then you said you introduced it in three directions. You talked about the data people needing to understand business, and
Mhm,
you talked about the business people actually needing to understand data and AI, and then
mhm,
also, so to speak, in terms of strategy, data leaders or people involved with that understanding business strategy.
mhm.
That's so we have data practitioners watching, so let's start with them. I mean, I know you've also been teaching, you've been involved with bringing talents up, you've consulted with companies, so you have a wealth of experience.
Mhm.
So what is it that the data people could do better, or
Mhm.
maybe what is it that they're blatantly doing wrong? Do you have some stories or examples you can share?
Sure. So I think one place where data people often get lost is that they get into the details of the algorithms way more than it's needed, and they forget about the business aspect. An example is, let's say, when they're trying to use machine learning to solve a use case, they focus a lot on the target variable, but what they forget is that how the target variable converts into some form of money or some sort of a quantifiable output. So till target variable, they continue, but translating that into a quantifiable output is where they miss information. And what is missing from a lot of them, and there has been also studies again come out on that more data people leave their jobs in 1.5 to 2 years because they don't want to focus on learning about the business. And this is something very interesting because now we have auto ML, we have tools like Data IQ and so on, which give people the power to run machine learning without knowing much about machine learning. So what is needed is this space in between, this bridge between the data and the business. And that's where I think data people are lacking skills.
What kind of skills would you like them to have? What can they do if they're listening to us now and they're asking, okay, so I'm a data scientist, I'm a data engineer, I'm a machine learning engineer, I do NLP. How can I help my situation and that of my company?
Mhm. I think the most important skill they need to develop is empathy. And second most important skill is curiosity. That is from
Okay.
my understanding. Empathy, because they need to be able to put themselves in the shoes of the end user who is going to use their product or their BI report to know why they are interested in this use case and what will they gain out of it. How will they use that product to actually in their day-to-day business to solve some business problem. And this is the part where I see a very miscommunication or a communication gap between the data and the business side, because I think they talk very different languages. So, and curiosity, because they need to learn about the business, you know. An example is, let's say, when we talk a lot about maintenance of machine learning system, when the data is flowing in, and then, you know, in the maintenance, you have to compare the distribution of the data you have trained your system on and the new data flowing in. There is a technical aspect to it, but there is also the business aspect to it. Some features might be more relevant to the business that they want to track versus others. And that requires, again, the curiosity component to know how change in some process will affect the data pipeline and then later on affect the business output.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's switch the point of view. So you also, of course, you have experience as a business leader as well, and
Mhm.
you've been working with businesses. So what is it that the business do vis-a-vis the data people that isn't working, or what is it that they should be doing better?
I think what they need to really, business people need to focus a bit on the communication. The AI has been used as a buzzword now way too much, and you know, the reality is that everyone who does Power BI also calls it artificial intelligence, and everyone who does machine learning also calls it artificial intelligence. So what is needed on their side is a clear understanding of what artificial intelligence is and what it isn't, and what kind of problems it can be used to, you know, it can help them solve. And
Okay.
what is also most importantly needed at their life is, at least at the level of middle management, is uh, whole understanding of the entire process of artificial intelligence. Like, quite
Hmm.
often I see that the use cases come from the business side, and data people somehow, you know, put some data set together, show that the model works, and they think only afterwards that my data pipelines are broken, you know, getting third party integrations is a challenge. So after investing 50,000 euros or so in a POC, they cannot go forward with. But this has to come again from the business side, knowing that, hey, can we, do we have the processes, do we have the data pipelines, do we have the things that are required to realize a project before we start the project, rather than just starting the project.
Understood. So you mentioned two components, if I got it correct. So the one
Mhm.
that you were now talking about is actually understanding the infrastructure that is required, and then
Correct.
also actually finding the investment. This is, I think, you know,
Yes.
the that's also an X, so to speak, as something X that you have to do there.
Hmm.
And then you mentioned something before that, and I just wanted to go back to that. So, you know, you mentioned the use cases and understanding the use case and actually understanding what approach is relevant to that. So I'm guessing that this revolves around, you know, a conversation that practitioners sometimes have, right? That very often actually a use case is solved with a linear regression,
Hmm.
and you need some good or additional arguments to try some fancy, say, neural network model based model or something like this.
Hmm.
So if business leaders need a bit more understanding of how data and AI work, what is it, how can they help themselves? How do you see that developing? I mean, they're business people, they're not technical people, and the specialization is obviously totally fine. So, what is it that they can do?
I think the most important thing they can do is, from again, that's my perception of it, is to acquire knowledge of basic statistics. Because, you know, it's very important to know what precision is, what recall is, more important than how the neural networks per se works, you know. And what they also need to know is that for what type of data and for what kind of use cases, what algorithms are good. An example is, if you're working with image data, it makes sense to use neural networks. But if you're working with some tabular data with limited information, neural networks should not be encouraged to be used. And so they need to know, statistics is very important for them, or let's say basic level of data literacy is very important.
Okay. So I have a comment here for you that I want to pick up from Danya. The data and business people need to get closer to one another. Can you please share some practical steps on how to best work together?
Very
Challenge
good.
for you.
It's a very good question, actually. Uh, I think the best way to start is that usually what happens is that, let's say, the senior leadership comes with some strategic milestones where they say that we want to use data to target these and these and these business processes or business KPIs. So that already requires companies to think about KPIs. Now, then what happens is that the middle management somewhere in between says that, okay, there is money to take, let's start with use cases. So when they are planning and thinking about use cases, they actually need to bring already data scientists on board. Here, I would share some personal experience. There was one company I was helping them build up their analytics translator training, which was scaled to the whole organization. So what we did for them is that we brought in people from sales, from marketing, from other departments to think about our AI use cases, where we taught them the basics of AI, we made them define the AI use cases, and later on we brought in data scientists to work together with the business part, knowing that okay, is this use case feasible with what I have right now or not. So what they did, they started with a big funnel. On the top they have tens of use cases. They drilled it down with data science people. Okay, these are the ones that we can target already now, and from this they took them to the next stage. Okay, let's do the POC and see if the idea works. So bringing people on board already in the early stages, also data engineers in the early stages, can we build up this pipeline of a complicated use case, is the way forward from my understanding.
Okay, so there's a component where actually business people need to develop some understanding. You mentioned the statistics, and I think if I understood you correctly now, it's about when you sit down or you start working on this, that people need to talk to each other. They need to
Yes.
understand where the other side is coming from and kind of develop a kind of a plan and
Yeah.
a roadmap or an action plan, something to move forward. Okay,
Yeah.
so the people businesses need to be AI driven, and this question actually of getting use cases in production. And you mentioned, this problem with the POC cycle, investing a little bit, but it not going anywhere, so it doesn't go into production. And sometimes actually already the pipeline is broken, so the data infrastructure isn't really there. So
Yes.
this relationship of people to use cases in production and the data infrastructure, I suppose if companies want to be AI driven, that's what they need to solve, right?
Yes.
It's this kind of thing. Okay, so what have you seen? What would you like to share around that topic?
I think one very important thing is here is that data products are not the classical software products. The software products have a, let's say, less frequent update cycle in comparison to the data products. And uh, from my understanding, what is needed is that first of all, when you start with use cases, you start with the right use cases, and also you start with the use cases that bring in immediate return on investment, because the goal of artificial intelligence is to be self-sustaining. And if you're saving money from some cost reduction initiatives, or if you're making money from some new products, then you supply that money in the back into the AI initiatives. If you are flushing money from everywhere in your organization into AI and nothing is coming out of it, it's probably not the best idea. That's what needed. And what is also needed is, I think, the IT needs to be on board, because right now data teams are somewhere sometimes they're under IT, sometimes there is a CDO in place, but that's only for the namesake kind of role. Other times something else is a problem. And what is happening is that this DevOps or the IT team somehow understands the importance of it, but are also not used to this new infrastructure, new technology spaces, and so on. So they need to be again reskilled on that aspect of problems. Like one bank I'm aware of in Switzerland, uh, they wanted to do a huge transformation into data. So what they did, they trained all their previous business analysts and DevOps people into cloud engineering. So those people became solution architects for their internal teams. That led to actually again fast productionization of use cases.
Okay, understood. Thank you so far. This actually allows me to move us on a little bit.
Mhm.
So the reason why we're speaking today also is because from the 22nd to the 24th of June, the Data Lift Summit will be happening in Berlin. So if you're watching and you want to find out, please go to the datalift.eu to get the full program and also get your tickets if you like. And actually, you'll be giving a keynote.
Mhm.
And you were just speaking to that. So just with the example of the bank, and it was a
Mhm.
reskilling initiative, right? So
Mhm.
what kind of reskilling or hiring initiatives do business need to become AI driven? That's the topic that we just hit upon. And now I also, of course, know that you used to be a leader at a boot camp, which
Mhm.
allows people to start a career, to kind of transition into this kind of data career. So I would like to go here for a few minutes and actually start with the reskilling, because you just spoke about how do you see this? Do you have more examples? How could companies tackle this kind of stuff so that it works?
First thing the companies need to know is they need to identify where do they stand right now.
Okay.
Are they a lagger Are they in the development space? Are they in the space that they're already a leader? Because once they know where they stand right now, they can identify whom they need to reskill and whom they need to hire. An example is that if you're in very AI passive organization, a company that has no idea what it is and is interested in artificial intelligence, that's the company where the leadership should be the first people trained in knowing what artificial intelligence
Hmm.
is, and how it can help their organization, and what kind of problems can they try to solve with it right now. And once they have developed that understanding, then they should think about either bringing an external company on board, or hiring, if you need a data scientist with multiple skills who has experience developing end-to-end products, and who can help them realize those products. Then, from the passive, they moved into a bit more advanced stage, when let's say, the middle space of artificial intelligence development, before they are leaders. In this space, what happens is that these companies have generally big teams in place. They have data scientists in place. They have developed maybe one or two use cases somehow, one way or another. They have managed to do it. That's the company where the approach is very different. There, the data people need, so as the data science people need to be able to be trained again in more productionization of the systems. Middle management need to be trained there to come up with more use cases, identification of the use cases, and then how to define those use cases with the business people together and develop a common understanding. Now, once they're in from this middle space and they're moving into the leader space, then they have to target another process. So in the later stages, they have to target IT teams, because these are the companies that know that, okay, we know that artificial intelligence generates value. We have proven it in one or two use cases. We are seeing return on investment. Now we have to focus on scaling our entire infrastructure so that we can create and productionize those use cases at fast pace. So there they have to train IT or hire more, let's say, data engineer or data engineering type of people. So it really varies in what stage of development you are in, and who should be reskilled and who should be hired at that particular stage. And once you are a leader, it's already known that the leader organizations actually are in a constant process of reskilling, hiring, reskilling, hiring, reskilling, hiring.
Okay. Let's unpack a little bit more, because
Yes.
you mentioned at the beginning that this is the 100x thing. So I understood. If I let's see first if I understood correctly. So you said that if it's an organization that doesn't really yet have experience,
Mhm.
and can we define that as it's a company that doesn't actually have a use case in production,
Or
like
let's say
zero?
that they have no understanding of what AI is. They just heard
Okay.
the buzzwords.
Okay. They just heard the buzzwords. Then you say what's really important for this type of organization is that they start at the top.
Yes.
Okay. So the executives actually need to be willing to embrace the topic, get an understanding, get an overview, and understand what it might do for their
Hmm.
businesses.
Exactly.
Okay, so then let's assume we have a company that is already dabbling a little bit. It has, say, data practitioners or, say, data literate people.
Hmm.
Maybe the data literate people in their day to day work are beginning to identify use cases and develop an interest. Maybe on their own time or with a little budget, they're working to understand if there is an interesting use case. There's
Hmm.
sort of like a minimalist POC showing that principally is possible. What do they then need to do when they've arrived at that stage? What is it that they need to do in terms of reskilling and hiring, and why is it so much important than just buying some fancy technology?
Uh, I think when one thinks, first of all, I will answer the second question, buying some fancy technology. The problem is not of technology. Problem is of the people. And again, there was some studies coming out of MIT and Stanford clearly stating that technology has only 3% contribution to increasing the probability of success with artificial intelligence. So just 3%. So technology is a very very small component. What has a huge impact is strategy that increases the likelihood of driving financial benefits from artificial intelligence by 14%. So when you are in the second stage that they have done some dabbling, they have some POCs in place. I think that's the time that where the again a part of the strategy has to be redefined. How do they want to, what kind of processes they want to target, how do they want to productionize the use cases they have done for POC for, because those should be the first one target. And that usually requires either building up data pipelines or training the data science people in deployment related knowledge. So there, the approach becomes very different.
Okay, I have a another comment or question coming in for you. So actually asking you start hiring or reskilling in data science or data engineering. So a company is doing this. Let's say the data science people are more responsible for the modeling, and the
Mm-hmm.
engineering people are more responsible for the infrastructure, which could be could be both the data pipelines, the pre-processing, that stuff that goes into the model,
Mm-hmm.
and that once you have a model, actually getting it into production. So how do you see this?
A very tricky question. Should data scientists do the job of data engineers or other wise or not? I think it again depends upon the kind of organization. Let's say if you're a small and medium-sized enterprise where everything can be run with a data warehouse, learning basic data engineering, basic warehousing principles, SQL, and so on is not very challenging. So that's something the data scientists can take into their hands. But if it's a big organization, real-time development, real-time data flow pipelines, and complicated processes, multiple integrations across several systems, that's the time that data engineers become more relevant. And so it really depends the type of organization and the kind of use case. If your use case is targeting 5 people in an organization, probably data scientists can develop the pipeline and design even a Streamlit app or a Python app for them. But if a use case requires creating a mobile app which has to be scaled to thousands of customers, then I wouldn't trust data scientists in that space. I would say that let's bring the ML engineers or data engineers on board for the data flow.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So you mentioned earlier that companies that are successful understand that it's a continuous cycle of actually reskilling and hiring.
Yes.
Um, I mean, why? What's so important about it, and how do you do it?
So I think uh, why most important is that there is a lot of brain drain that's happening from organizations,
Hmm.
and at least that's what I see, and I think that's the general understanding that data scientists leave their job in usually 2 years. Middle management changes their jobs in 3 to 4 years. And
Okay.
so what is happening is that the people are moving from one organization to another, to another, to another. Technology is changing, businesses are evolving in themselves. Let's say if you're designing a new product that requires looking at your current business process from a very different perspective, then you need to understand and learn about that business perspective. So that's why it needs a constant reskilling, constant update. What is also why it's also needed is that uh, there is clear lack of people. I mean, we don't have there are clear evidences around it. Germany needs around 1 million or so data scientists until 2025, and that I don't see that coming right now. So most companies are struggling finding talent. Most of the talent is stuck with classical tech companies. There's lack of talent, lack of knowledge, and for now the only way to do that is to have this constant cycle, identify where things are going wrong, what is missing, train, start, go further, then identify the gaps again, and so the job of HR is becoming more important.
Understood. So also interesting. You didn't so much focus on updates in technology
Hmm.
as on the evolving markets that require businesses to adapt to their changing circumstances and develop new products or modify them and something like this. And also just simply the fact that tenure at companies has become shorter, as we're well aware, and people
Hmm.
tend to move on. Okay, so going back to the reskilling for a moment,
Hmm.
what type of people? So let's say a company has lots of people. Let's say they have engineers and they have people in business, perhaps people in accounting. Do you have any suggestions about what kind of employees to look to if you're thinking about reskilling? Do you have some examples?
Sure. I think the first of all, the most important way to identify the right people is the curiosity component. Because if someone is natively curious, they're going to put an effort to acquire a knowledge, some new knowledge. That's very important. And what is important is, again, it depends upon the kind of organization. If you're a big organization, you want to target the end user always, sales people, marketing people, HR people, who actually can think about use cases that help them do their job better. Uh, but if you're, let's say, a more tech-driven company, you want to target the IT department there. Teach them new technology, teach them how they can build up their own infrastructure without bringing always outsourcing help on board. So it really depends upon the kind of organization and the kind of things you want to achieve for your organization. If you're a company where you believe that, okay, we have to reinvent our business model, then it's again the C level that needs constant reskilling or new form of reskilling to know that, okay, how do we reinvent our business now with artificial intelligence, which we see a classical example is of Netflix. No, we don't have to go so far with that. They were a CD renting company, and now they're the biggest online movie watching company in the world. So
Yes, the so to speak, the complete transformation of the company.
transformation.
Understood. So, final question from my side.
Yes.
You also spoke about hiring, and you mentioned that Germany probably needs 1 million data scientists and or data people, and we frankly don't have a clue where they're going to come from. So, and then you probably also noticed, and I've noticed that companies at the moment are really keen on hiring more experienced people. So,
Hmm.
the seniors, so to speak. But if a company was willing to take a risk on hiring new people, people that are transitioning into the career, or maybe younger people, or people coming out of the universities or something like this, where should companies look for their hiring initiative? Where do you think there is talent that not so many people are aware of?
Hmm. I think one talent place that often gets underlooked is boot camps, these intensive education programs for 3 months or 6 months, where people acquire very fast a lot of knowledge. And while building up the past business I was involved in, that was the toughest thing to do, to tap into the market and explain them that, hey, these guys can do it as well. you know and that's a very good place to start. A lot of universities are now starting with new master's degree programs in data science, and so they are good places to start as well. And COVID has made us very international, so if worst of the worst comes, maybe it makes sense to expand businesses beyond the horizons of Europe and target markets like in Asia and Africa to find right people.
Okay, so thank you for this, Nitin. You're actually saying, that there is a pool of talent out there.
Yeah.
Go and find it,
Yeah.
and be creative about it in bringing them on board and making it work for your company. Okay, thank you very much, Nitin. Our half hour has passed, so this
Mhm.
is it for today. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll
Thanks.
see you in Berlin for your keynote.
We see us in Berlin. Yes. Thank you very much, Chris, for bringing me here, and I look forward to be in Berlin.